Good morning. My name is Brian Wheeler, Director of Communications for the City of Charlottesville. Welcome to Cville360, a program to inform and engage the Charlottesville community. Cville360 is available on our streaming sites, Comcast Channel 10, and on a companion Zoom webinar so you can tune in live and on demand. The program allows us to engage our community and provide you access to city leaders, especially during this time of the coronavirus pandemic. We use the Zoom webinar so you can join the broadcast and ask questions of our guest. If you want to try the webinar, visit charlottesville.gov/Zoom for the registration information. A link to each show appears at the bottom of the page. When we take questions, we will allow up to 8 people to address our guest, and you have up to 3 minutes to ask a question or make a comment on the topic being discussed. Today's show is a check-in on the state of the coronavirus in our region with City Councilor Lloyd Snook, who joins us today via Zoom. Good morning, Lloyd. Can you hear us, Lloyd?
Yes, can you hear me?
We can. Welcome.
Okay.
And good morning.
Thank you.
You know, last week we were going to do a show, but it was right after a council meeting. And I think some of us were still in bed last week after that
council meeting that ran till 2:30 in the morning, yes.
It did. So thank you for giving me a week off on the show.
Sure.
Appreciate it. So today we want to talk about the ordinances that City Council passed. And, you know, I want to go through some of the details of that and some of the things we've done in partnership with our neighbors in Albemarle County. And these are actions to reduce the spread of COVID-19 in combination with new measures and then a rollback to some Phase 2 standards previously in place in Virginia. But before we get into the details, you know, Lloyd, the city has generally been very cautious with its reopening plans and with regard to bringing staff back to City Hall. And we opened City Hall lobby for appointment-only transactions with a couple of departments last week. Do you think we've taken the right approach?
Well, I certainly think it's appropriate to have been very conservative about things. We've tried to have a couple of goals in mind with our staff. The first goal in mind was to keep their safety paramount. The second goal was to not have to lay anybody off or give them furloughs or cause them to lose income and health insurance, by the way, during a time of great financial crisis for them and for us. So those two things we were concerned with. So the reopening, when we were going to do it, when we were talking about it, was always going to be undertaken very cautiously and frankly slowly. And so that's the gradual reopening that City Hall is going through.
And is this where you thought we'd be 4 months into this pandemic?
I think when I first came on this show to talk about things, we were all envisioning what is sometimes referred to as a V-shaped depression or recession, where it would be a sharp drop, things would change, sharp kick back up. That is actually what has happened in some places that have been very, very strict in their social distancing. In South Korea, for example, they've had some financial or some economic problems, but nowhere near like what we've had, because they got a real firm handle on the social distancing and masking and all the other things. And they've been able to kind of reopen their economy a little bit, certainly more than what it looks like we may be ending up with. So I think, and also if you think about it, the very first of the financial packages coming out of Washington also seemed to visualize this very sharp turnaround and not visualize the possibility that here 3 or 4 months later we would still be looking at massive unemployment and no end in sight to the downturn. So I would like to say, yes, I had such foresight to be able to say that all this was going to be happening exactly this way, but that'd be faking it, because we were all being a lot more optimistic. Frankly, I think we all thought that the country as a whole would take this business much more seriously, and that we wouldn't see so many deniers out there. It's the deniers who are going to keep us down at this point.
Well, let's talk about the special meeting that was held yesterday. Charlottesville City Council met at 4 o'clock yesterday after the Board of Supervisors was already having a meeting and taking a similar action. You passed an emergency ordinance, and we're going to put up on screen here some of those details, and I'll just run through them real quickly, and then we'll talk about each of these, Lloyd. The first is cloth face coverings required in public places, and we've put an asterisk after the end of a couple of these just because there are some exceptions, but we're going to boil it down here into a couple sound bites. The number 2 item is in-person attendees at gatherings were reduced from 250 people to 50 people. And then the third big item is indoor occupancy limits at food establishments were reduced to 50% of capacity. Still requires a 6-foot separation among the tables in any venue. The measures all take effect this Saturday, August 1st, and violations are to be reported to the Virginia Department of Health for local enforcement by the Charlottesville Police Department, which we want to emphasize is going to focus on education and giving warnings when they first encounter somebody violating this ordinance. So, Lloyd, let's talk about how this was done in conjunction with Albemarle County. Can you talk about what you know about how this came together and why we are working together as a region?
Well, first of all, the obvious reason to be working together is that nobody in Charlottesville and Albemarle thinks of themselves as separate from the other. Nobody who is visiting from the outside has any idea when they're in the city of Charlottesville or in the county of Albemarle. This is the kind of thing where our regulations, our statutes, our ordinances ought to be in sync. It was important to us from the very beginning that they be in sync. And so that's when we started talking about the fact, and really the major conversation began around the first week in July. You may remember that there was a flap because of Midsummer's party down at the university at the SAE house on Madison Lane. There was a picture that was taken showing a whole lot of people clearly not wearing masks, clearly not social distancing, and just looking very much like those videos of big parties in places like Florida and Arkansas that led to becoming super spreader events. And so city officials and county officials were sort of sharing these oh my God reactions and said, what can we do about this? Well, some of us had been a little bit anxious about the governor's quick move to phase 3 to the looser requirements, allowing, for example, a gathering of 250 people. That was one of the things that was of particular concern to us. And this picture of this party just created for us this image of what we expect the university students coming back to be like. Those of us who have lived here a while understand what the first few weeks of the university student life is like, and how absolutely inappropriate that is going to look in the COVID era, and how dangerous it's going to look in the COVID era. And also, frankly, how uninterested, for the most part, UVA students have seemed to be in following the rules that people are trying to set for them. So we wanted to do something that would basically, hit the stop button, hit the reset button, whatever metaphor you want to use there, to cause people to say, okay, we're not going to do in 2020 what we might have done in July or August of 2019. We're going to put a stop to this sort of before it gets started. And that's how we started talking between the city and the county. The city attorney and the county attorney got their heads together. The city councilors and board of supervisors members talked, and we came up with a fairly well agreed upon strategy. There are really only a few differences between the two statutes, or between the two ordinances. One of them, one of the differences is that the county has decided to make these offenses potentially jailable offenses. The city has said, we're trying to keep people out of our jails right now. Fines are going to be deterrent enough. So that's the hope. And that's kind of how it all came to be. And over the course of the last week or two, as we kind of worked on the draft of this thing, it went back and forth. And when the county would propose a change, they'd run it by us. And when we'd propose a change, we'd run it by them and make sure that we weren't ever too far apart on how we were looking at this thing. So that's kind of how it worked and why it worked. I think it's so, at least the product at this point is two ordinances that are going to be very similar, that are not going to create a situation where people would say, okay, I'm on one side of the county line, I can do this here, but I couldn't do it over there, with the consequence of, hey, if I'm wrong, I can go to jail. We don't want that situation. Anytime there's confusion like that, that's absolutely unfair to anybody charged with any kind of a crime. So it's been important to us to keep the basic criteria of how you could be found guilty, what you could be found guilty of, to keep those very similar.
If you're in the audience and you want to ask a question of Counselor Snook, you can click the raise hand icon in the Zoom webinar, and I'll bring you into the conversation. We'll be able to take up to 8 people who can ask a question or make a comment. We do have one hand raised right now, and Robin Hoffman will be with you in just a moment. You can also type a question in the Q&A module, and my staff is also watching on Facebook, and we'll see if there are any questions or comments there that we need to share. Lloyd, during the meeting yesterday, Councilor Heather Hill, thanked the county for their leadership role in putting this together and allowing us some time to work as a city to get our version of the ordinance ready. Ours is pinned, to the city charter. Theirs is pinned to state code. And so there's some differences there, as you mentioned, and that takes some time by our staff to make sure we're doing everything the right way. And again, our focus with our law enforcement as far as applying this is to make sure we issue warnings and that we're educating people. And I think that's been made clear in our ordinance. You also, Councilor Snook, talked about the University of Virginia. Maybe you could talk about some of the limits. We often see constituent emails coming in. Can you make UVA do X, Y, and Z? And could you talk a little bit about how there's some things we can't do, and how?
The first answer to any question to a city councilor of can you make the university do blank, the answer is going to be no. We have no authority to make them do anything. We can try to persuade them. We can try to say it's in everybody's best interest if we all do it this way, but we can't make anybody do anything. So the issue arose particularly in the context of the SAE party. What could we do? Could we? That's actually one because it happened on a property that is within the city, in Madison Lane. We could have, done something, I suppose, if we'd gotten a call in real time and told the police to go over there and do something. But that's not the way we want to do that. We don't really want this to be a police function. We want this to be an exercise in, we just have to be realistic. We have to be able to treat the adults, which is what the students are, virtually all of them, maybe a few freshmen who are not, or first years, but they're adults and they're smart. That doesn't mean they act smart. It doesn't mean they don't need to be educated as to what is smart, but they also generally want to do the right thing. They don't want to be seen as basically sociopaths, which is how they might well get portrayed if it is seen that as though they don't care about the state of their fellow man. And so we want to appeal to those better aspects of their nature, and that's going to be a lot more it's going to be a lot easier, a lot more successful, I think, if we go at it that way. Now, having said that, I will tell you that after there was some flap over the SAE party and the Midsummer's party, apparently some directives went out, and certainly a letter from President Ryan went out saying, "Come on, people, shape up." And at least one fraternity has apparently decided that they're going to handle their rush activities at some place away from Charlottesville, away from public scrutiny, and so they can continue to do all of their male bonding or whatever they're doing, and certainly they're drinking and carousing away from public view. I'm not sure that helps much. In fact, it doesn't help at all. So it's going to take some education for a lot of UVA students to realize that this is not something that is going to go away if they just don't get caught at it. And that's something that it's going to take some doing to get to that point. But that's kind of where we are with the university. The university administration is very much on the right page with us. But that we also acknowledge how difficult it is that they're going to be trying to herd 20,000 cats over there, and they're not always going to be successful. All we can do is to do the best we can do.
And let's take a question from our audience. Robin Hoffman, you've got your hand raised. You're on with City Councilor Lloyd Snook. Go ahead, Robin.
Hi.
Hey,
Can you
Robin.
hear me?
Yes, I can.
Thank you so much for everything you just said and are doing. I just want to praise the City Council. I want to praise Brian Wheeler. I want to praise everybody all the time because I feel like you guys work very hard and are smart. And so we're very lucky. The other thing I was noticing, like I'm on all the Zooms from all over the world. Not the world. Well, yeah, kind of. They have a lot of programs, for instance, for the National Educators United, where they actually, you can go on Zoom and then they put you on the map so you can see how many participants there are and that sort of thing. So the Zoom has enabled everybody to really communicate very quickly. And what I want to say about that is, do you think each city needs to shut down for 6 weeks like they did in Cape Cod? They actually just did that Saturday. They announced that people are just, you're saying, people are smart, but there's also people that are American and feel entitled, and they do that everywhere. They do it in Europe. They go around and they eat McDonald's instead of French fruit. There's a lot of discrepancies between states of how people want to participate or not. Trump supporters don't want to wear masks because that makes them look like they're not supporting Trump. I mean, it's screwed up. So the reality is, I think the leadership just have to shut down like they're doing in Cape Cod. They just shut down for, because especially in the summer, the teachers know that people who travel, they come back into schools and they just spread their germs. So, I mean, I think the leadership here at City Council can, can't really police, but can certainly mandate certain traveling into like the Ravenna River Trail. That's only 2 feet away. You face somebody with aerosol spray, that sort of thing. Like specific to each state, each city. I think we need to say, okay, we have all these contagions right now. Everybody can't come here, period. What do you think?
Well,
legally.
Legally, I don't think individual localities are going to be seen as having the right to pass their own laws, for their own policies, totally unique to their situation. That doesn't mean that things can't be adapted somewhat. I will say one of the things that I'm hoping at some point to get to talk to a health department person, and one of the things I'd like to ask them is, let's look at the last 6 months or 5 months in Virginia, and let's look at the places where things spiked early and then calmed down. And I was looking in Arlington, for example, which going back 3 months ago, their positivity rate on their testing was well over 10%. All of Northern Virginia was a hot spot. people were looking at the notion that the fear was that if we reopened UVA with Fairfax and Arlington, Loudoun being such hotspots, we would be just inviting trouble. Now the problem is more with Tidewater and the 757 area code. But the point is that Arlington was able to get itself under control. The positivity rate, just for those who are not familiar with the term, one of the guides that epidemiologists have for looking at how seriously the infection is growing is to look at the positivity rate. How many tests that are being administered are coming back positive? If you are over 10%, you're in trouble. If you are under 5%, you're good. We're at about 7.5% right now. We were below 5% 8 weeks ago. So we have clearly gotten worse in the last 2 months. On the other hand, Arlington, which had been over 10, is now at 3.1. And I'd like to know, what are they doing so right that we can emulate? There are other places in Virginia. You look at the Eastern Shore. People might say, "Well, what could Charlottesville learn from the Eastern Shore?" Maybe not a whole lot, or even from the Culpeper area. I think it's called the Rapidan Health District, which had been a hot spot a few months ago and is now down around 4%. These are areas where I think we need to understand what has worked so well. And I assume that the health department people know that, but I'd like to hear it from them and have them tell us so that we're sure that we're deriving the right message and the right lessons. I was reading something in the Washington Post just this morning where they were basically saying we ought to shut down the entire economy, the entire country, basically, starting now for 2 months. And that's essentially what places like South Korea and other countries have done. And then they could reopen gradually, and now they're back to normal. If we could do that and we could be shut down, then we could get back to normal much faster. I'm not sure that that's the right answer. It might have been the right answer 5 months ago. But if we think that we're going to be getting vaccines in the next 3 or 4 months, 5 months maybe that's a less persuasive argument. But it's definitely true that we as a state need to take things much more seriously, and we need to be able to say we're going to allow for different responses in different places. Maybe the answer is to say we cut everybody back to level 1 unless you prove with your positivity rate and your infection rate, your new cases rate, and so on, that you're deserving of a bump up to level 2. Or if you're starting at level 2, you're doing well, you bump up to level 3. So that certainly could be done. But I don't see ever a situation where the locality itself would get to call that shot.
Well, let's talk about a couple of things Lloyd mentioned there, and I've got the data from the health district available on the percent positive test. And as Councilor Snook mentioned, it was about 7.6% on July 13th, dropped to 6.6% July 20th, and then yesterday it was back up to 7.4%. And what we've been looking for as a metric to watch is a downward trend of that 14-day average. So it's been up and down, and right now it's back up to about 7.4%. If you've got
7.5 this morning.
Great. And if you want access to the health district data, you can go to charlottesville.gov/coronavirus, and we've got their data embedded into the website there where you can take a look at it. If you have a question for Councilor Snook and you're on the Zoom webinar, you can join us by clicking the raise hand icon, or you can type your question in the Q&A module. If you're on via Facebook or watching on Channel 10 right now, you can join the webinar at any point by going to charlottesville.gov/Zoom. Quickly register and you can get right on and join the conversation. So Robin, thank you for that question. Back to the university, Councilor Snook, one thing that was mentioned in yesterday's meeting was that President Ryan had sent City Council and the Board of Supervisors a message, and I wonder if you could share what the sentiment of that message was.
Basically, I don't have it in front of me, but basically he applauded the text of the resolutions or the ordinances that we were proposing at that point to adopt, and he basically pledged the university's support for the goals that we're seeking. I have to say, one of the things that has been motivating to some of us in all of this is the grave concern that when 20,000 students come back from all over the place with no quarantining having taken place, probably, we can't know in individual cases, but probably none. 20,000 people coming back from all over the place. There appears to be some evidence, and I talked yesterday about one of the things that's frustrating is that we're dealing with a lot of unanswered questions or hinted at answers. One of the hints is that it seems that people roughly 15 to age 30 are much more likely to be asymptomatic than old geezers like me, and they're less likely, therefore, to know that they are infectious, but they're just as infectious as somebody who is truly sick. So the problem that we're very much afraid of is that all of these 20-somethings coming back to school are going to be coming back thinking, I'm feeling fine, I'm not sick at all, there's no reason I can't go out and party, and there's no reason that 25 of my closest friends can't come party with me, and that we can't assemble in a bar, and so on. And all of the evidence we've got, which is not much, but it's at least some, suggests that that's dangerous. And so one of the things we're both city and county hoping is that if we have a clampdown in the first month, 2 months, from August 1st to September 29th, 60 days, which is the limit of an emergency ordinance like this, if we have that clampdown quickly, that we can, in essence, teach the students the behaviors we hope that they will then model for us. That they will come to understand that A, it's important, and B, yes, it actually can be done. It's not that hard. You can still have a social life without, big bar hopping scenes on Thursdays and Friday nights. So that's the hope. And in this, I sometimes feel like I'm trying to be really paternalistic towards university students. I'm not trying to be, but at some point, I kind of wonder what we can do that is going to have any likelihood at all of getting through to the students who, whether it's, some of them are coming as basically Trump-supporting deniers, and some of them are coming as, I'm not going to let anything get in the way of me and my friends having a good time, or whatever the reason might be, that they need to understand that this is a real problem. It's going to have real consequences, certainly for Charlottesville, for their education. Our grave fear is that if we get a sort of a super spreader event coming out of a frat party or something, that it spreads throughout Charlottesville, and that means spreading throughout our schools and having to shut down schools and causing all kinds of problems. So we're hoping we can get ahead of that if we can just get everything under control between August 1st and September 29th.
And one of the questions I received yesterday was, does the ordinance apply to local schools or the university? We've already talked about the university, but it also doesn't apply to private and public schools.
Right. That's right.
Yep. So if you have a question for Councilor Snook, please feel free to click the raise hand icon in the Zoom webinar. We'll bring you into the conversation. You can also type a question in the Q&A module. Councilor Snook, several months ago, I remember you saying, and I believe it was on this program, it might have been an interview somewhere else, that there was a possibility that UVA students would not return. And I remember being shocked at that statement. And you were talking about it in the context of our local economy. So let's go back to the ordinance, and I want to put it up on the screen again and just remind our listeners what we're talking about. The cloth face covering requirement, my guess is you're not hearing a lot of feedback or pushback about that. I think people have gotten the memo on that one. They're reducing the number of people from 250 to 50. We can talk about that. But also, let's focus on what a lot of the email traffic to council yesterday was from the restaurants and concerns about 50% capacity versus having a 6-foot separation in general. So what can you tell us about the feedback you've gotten from restaurant owners, and how do you see where we are right now with the local economy?
Well, the state of the economy is, everybody knows, it's precarious. It is particularly precarious for people in the restaurant business who have been limping along, in many cases completely closed over the last 4 months. I wish that there were a better answer. I wish that there were a way that we could not have to close down places where strangers gather. But where strangers gather is where infections spread. When we've drafted this, as we're going, basically it's going back to phase 2 when the rest of the state is at phase 3. Frankly, the governor may take us back to phase 2 as early as this afternoon, I think. And in which case some of what we've done will essentially have been redundant. But the problem for restaurants, and first of all, when I've walked the downtown mall at lunchtime, I haven't seen any place that was even close to 50% occupancy. So I don't really, of course, at lunchtime isn't the only time they're worried about. They're worried about the nighttime gatherings and so on. But I think there are a lot of places that would frankly regard 50% occupancy as an improvement over their present situation. I also think that if you look at trying to maintain the 6-foot social distancing under the governor's phase 3, where he said that they were not going to limit the occupancy indoors as long as you had the 50% as long as you had the 6-foot distancing. My guess is that it comes out to pretty much the same place. That if you don't have the 6-foot distancing and you do have 50% occupancy, it's probably going to look pretty much the same. So if anything, we're making this a little bit easier for the restaurateur to figure out how to enforce. I'll also say it's our great hope that this will all be unnecessary by September 29th, and that we can go back to more liberal rules on such things. But for that, we're going to have to see new cases not continue to rise. New cases have been rising both in Charlottesville and in the Thomas Jefferson Health District and in the state as a whole, and have been rising faster than they were rising a month ago. The pace of increase is accelerating. On the other hand, the good news is that it appears that most of the new cases are being found in people who are either only mildly symptomatic or maybe completely asymptomatic, and may just be simply being found because they're the subject of contact tracing or something like that. And there is some reason to believe that those people are more likely to be younger people. They are more likely to be, frankly, more like UVA students. And so, to a certain extent, what we're seeing may be this problem that I mentioned earlier of asymptomatic 20-year-olds being the worst example of a spreader that, certainly worse than somebody who's actively sick. And that gets back to this notion of we want to try to get a hold of this problem and wrap our arms around it before it completely blows up on us. And that time is now, and it's for the next 2 months.
Well, it's certainly been good to see the city and county working together to send a consistent message to the community. And part of that message has not changed since the beginning. We need to be washing our hands, we need to wear face coverings, and we need to practice social distancing. And all those things still apply, especially as we welcome back UVA students from wherever they're coming from back to this community. And we know UVA is going to be focused intently on testing their students and ensuring that contact tracing and those measures are all in place. Those are challenges for the broader community as well. We've had the health district officials on talking about testing capacity, talking about the challenges with contact tracing. So I think those are still works in progress that we all need to be aware of. Lloyd, anything else you want to add about the ordinance that we've passed?
Well, the main thing I want to emphasize in all of this is that the purpose of the ordinance was passed under the authority of the portion of the Charlottesville Charter that authorizes us to act to control infectious disease. And that's the purpose. The purpose is not to be, the biggest Scrooge around and stomp on everybody's fun. The idea is that we want to stop contagious disease. And that's essential to our economy, to the success of the University of Virginia, to the success of everybody in this area. So it's important to us that we actively have the support of the folks in the county, of the folks at the university. We're all working together. We're meeting regularly, at least once a week, to go over all of this stuff and to make sure that everybody is comfortable with the different directions we're taking. So these are all good things. The final thing that I would say is that I want people to know that over the last 5 months or so, I guess it was from March 12th when the city declared its emergency. From that point forward, we've had a lot of people in City Hall. Sometimes I always use the term in City Hall loosely because they're not actually working from City Hall, but in city government doing a lot of very, very long and tedious work to enable our response to the coronavirus. One of the things, of course, Brian, was the creation of this show and your efforts, and you're having to be the Zoom Meister extraordinaire. Every time we have a public meeting, it's got to be Zoomed somehow or another, which means either Brian or somebody else in his office has to stay with us. And in fact, last week when we were up until 2:30 in the morning because the agenda of City Council was so long, guess who was also up at 2:30 in the morning? Thank you, Brian.
And David Dillahunt, who was behind the scenes on the cameras.
Okay, so And throughout city government, we have had extraordinary efforts put out by Kaki Dimmick, Social Services, Human Services Director, and all of her staff, by the finance people, Todd Divers and Jason Vandiver and Chris Cullinan and the budget analysts and so on that have really kept us moving forward. The city manager's office, Dr. Richardson is off for a few days in a well-deserved break because he's been worked to a frazzle in all of this. I just can't say enough good things about how hard the city staff has been forced to work and how well they have, in fact, worked over the last 5 months.
Thank you. We do have a question from the audience, and Macy Moores, you're on with City Councilor Lloyd Snook, and you've got 3 minutes to ask a question or make a comment. Go ahead.
Thank you. Can you guys hear me?
We can.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So I just want to go back. You touched on the fear of students spreading through socializing, frat parties, and things like that. And you mentioned how, we really need to educate our students on just how serious this is. And we know these students are smart, but I guess you could say careless. What methods would you suggest to really convince people, especially students, people my age, how important this really is?
The first thing that I would say is that I think it has to be seen as socially unacceptable to be unmasked. Right now, I think in most circles, people are sort of afraid to say to somebody, hey, you got your mask? Put it on. It also has to be seen as socially acceptable to say, no, I'm not going to go to the bar tonight. If you want to come over and we'll have a drink on the porch and do our social distancing outside. I mean, the reality is that almost anything you do outside is probably not at all dangerous. It's the close contact that is the problem. We have, I've always referred to August, September, certainly the early part of October as the outdoor drinking season in Charlottesville. If you want to do your drinking, you got 2 months here to do it outdoors. Do it. And I'm being sort of facetious there, but ultimately the goal has to be not for folks like me to come in and fuss at you like I'm your angry grandparent or parent, hopefully, but to have a cultural ethos develop that everybody at the university just understands that masking is essential, that masking is not, a sissy thing or a democratic thing or anything thing. It's a human thing in the moment of a pandemic. It is what is going to get us to the end of this. And so moralizing from me is less effective than being a good social example for the rest of you. And I hope that the rest of you will be that kind of good social example and will be able to get your colleagues to follow suit. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Macy, for that question. I want to just recap some of the things about enforcement and how the public can report a problem or concern that they've got. With this ordinance, when we put out a media release yesterday, we provided a link to the Virginia Department of Health's website where they have a form to collect feedback about potential violations of the governor's executive orders, but they've also asked us here locally to have any potential violations of these ordinances passed by the Albemarle County Board of Supervisors and by City Council, to have any reports of violations to go through that same process. So you can find that link on our website at charlottesville.gov/coronavirus, and we have a link to the press release at the top of that page. And within that release, you can see the link to that system. So a report will come into the Virginia Department of Health. They will report it to our local Thomas Jefferson Health District, who will then notify the appropriate authorities in the city or the county. That way we can keep track of this and have some measurement about the types of issues that we're seeing and any pattern that might exist, so that we can focus our educational efforts in those areas. I don't see any other questions, Lloyd, and I want to give you the opportunity to wrap things up with a final comment here.
Well, I thought you gave me that opportunity about 5 minutes ago, but I don't have much else to say. I'd say that I look at this as an optimistic step, as a step toward the end. We know that the way we get to the end is by things happening outside, by things happening with social distancing, and by people wearing masks. And if we can organize our lives in such a way that we can accomplish those, that we can work with those three principles, we have a very good chance of getting to the end of, let's say, end of the 60-day period and saying, okay, we've gotten our positivity rate down, we've gotten our rate of transmission down, we're not spreading the virus as much, we have passed the test, we can now look to reopen things or at least keep things going in a liberal direction in that respect. So I look on it as not sort of the beginning of the end, but rather the time that we say, this is where we're going to start this trend that's going to get us to a healthier place in a month or two.
And I do see we have an audience member that's raised her hand again, and we can only call on people once during the program. We've had to formalize our public participation policy a little bit, so we will have up to 8 people on any given show and give you 3 minutes to address our speakers. Lloyd, I did think of one other topic that might be on people's mind. We were talking about the economy, and maybe you could talk about the budget process. Even though we're 1 month into the current year's budget, we know the community is anxious to start talking about the next budget, and that you've been anxious as one member of council to give regular updates on the financial health of the city. So maybe you could just let folks know what information you're trying to get and where we're going next.
Sure. When I came on city council, I was kind of surprised that we were not routinely getting some sort of a monthly check-in on the budget. Every nonprofit board I've ever been on, one of the things that happens in the monthly meetings is there's a treasurer's report, and the treasurer would say our revenues were up 10% and our expenses were down 5%. Things are looking good. And we weren't getting anything even that cursory. Now, that has not usually been a problem because for the most part, we've been doing our conservative hard work at the beginning so that we've got, if anything, conservative revenue projections and if anything, conservative expense projections. So it hasn't really been a problem, but we know that this year is going to be different. We don't even know how different it's going to be. And so we have asked that the city finance staff give us a report in the second meeting of each month. In this case, the next one would be August 17th, on what the financial picture looks like through the end of the previous month. So we will know on August 17th that our tax revenues were up or down, that our, in particular, I'd be curious to know about meals tax revenues. I'd be curious to know about lodging tax revenues, those kinds of things that are so much in danger here. I also want to know how we're doing about spending against some of the COVID-specific accounts. We have some accounts, for example, for housing relief, for food for people who need food, that kind of thing. I want to know how we're doing with those accounts, and I want to know it before an account runs out of money. Too often, these reports have come to us when somebody says, "Oh, we can't give that person any money anymore because we ran out of that money 3 months ago." That's nuts, and we need to know if somebody thinks it's important enough to bother to keep track of which account it's coming out of. It ought to be important enough to tell council if they're running into a problem that we can solve by a reallocation. So we'll be getting that kind of report every month, the second meeting of the month. So August 17th will be our first time for this, and it'll be an experiment for all of us, and we'll see what it is that they give us and what it is we want, and hopefully by a couple months down the road we'll have it figured out so that we're getting the information that we all want.
Councilor Snook, thank you very much for joining us on Cville360 today.
Thank you, Brian.
Our show next week will be preempted by a City Council community listening session regarding the future of policing in Charlottesville. So you can tune into that broadcast next Tuesday at 4 p.m. on August 4th, and you can get the agenda and webinar registration link at charlottesville.gov/Zoom. A week after that listening session, Mayor Nakia Walker and Police Chief Rochelle Brackney will appear on the program to respond to what they heard at that listening session and to receive additional input and questions from the community. That show will be at 11 a.m. on Tuesday, August 11th, so we hope you will join us. Please contact me with your feedback and ideas for future topics and guests. Thank you for watching, and please stay healthy.